right, welcome into another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by the Hoosier.com of the On3 Sports Network. Glad to have you on board for a tri-guest edition of In Touch, a triple D edition of guests with In Touch with Indiana Sports. Dylan Sinn, Drew Rosenberg, and Dustin Schutte all coming on today to talk about a myriad of different things, mainly the Indiana Hoosiers as well as the Indiana Pacers. I'm going to talk with Dylan about what happened at Hoosiers at Hubers a few days ago. Going to talk with Drew about what's going on with the NBA Finals and the Indiana Pacers success. And Dustin Schutte, resident Pacers fan, really just want to get his perspective on really him being a fan of the Pacers and the ride that it's been for him to go on through this NBA playoffs. And I look forward to sharing that conversation with you during today's show. So I'm going to quit blabbering. You're not going to hear a whole lot from me today. This is, again, like I said, this is the first time we've had 3 guests on one show. But I felt like it was, I feel like each one offers something different for today's episode. So I'm looking forward to sharing each of these conversations with you all. So we'll go and get into our first guest, Dylan Sinn of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. Going to talk all things Hoosiers and a little bit of NCAA football and basketball tournament expansion during our conversation. So we'll go ahead and transition into that segment right now. Joining me now from the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette, Dylan Sinn. Long time no see. How's it going, Mr. Sinn?
Absolutely, John. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a while.
It has been. I took a bit of a break back in April. My wife and I my wife birthed our firstborn child. So we've been enjoying that and all of the newness and enjoyment that comes with that. But we're back at it now and heading squarely into the off season when it comes to IU and collegiate athletics. And we got quite a few things to really get into this afternoon.
Yeah, well, absolutely. First of all, congratulations. That's wonderful news. Great to hear. And I'm glad that, you have a few minutes to record a podcast here. I wasn't sure you might have time for that.
I will say, I just had a conversation with my wife, and time is very slim as it is, and I've already stretched myself thin enough. So I do my best to make times for our friends with the Hoosier.com and On3. So I'm glad to do it. I'm glad you're here with me, and we're going to go ahead and start with Hoosiers at Hubers. You were there this past week. I'll go ahead and just break it wide open. What was kind of your initial takeaway from both Darian DeVries and Curt Cignetti down at Starlight, Indiana?
Yeah, I think the number one thing for me was that they both, obviously this is pretty basic because they're not going to say anything else. Although Curt Cignetti might, if he felt differently, but they both like their teams. I think it's fair to say. I think Curt Cignetti might tell us if he didn't, but they both seem to think that they have what it takes to win a lot of games. This year, Curt Cignetti kind of made a joke at the beginning. The first thing he said was someone asked him, basically, did you feel like you needed to go out and get, or how did you feel about your spring transfer portal haul? And he's like, well, we wanted a few more guys, but then Darian got hired and he had no roster, so that we felt the pinch from that.
I was going to get into that. I'm glad you mentioned that because I do think a lot of that was tongue-in-cheek because no matter who the head coach was, even if you had Mike Woodson around for another year, basketball is still going to have some NIL priorities. So no matter if they were building a new roster or not, they were going to need money for basketball. So hopefully, and I feel like most people took that response as something of a joke, of course.
Yes, and 100% was. It was tongue-in-cheek. It was kind of like... Basically, it was Curt Cignetti saying, "I'm comfortable here now. Let's pick on the new guy a little bit. Make him feel welcome, make him feel comfortable. Let him know we have his back, that type of thing." Because he did very immediately after that, just to make sure, in case anyone wasn't sure it was a joke. He went out of his way to talk about how much he likes Darren and how much he thinks he's going to win because he likes his process, he likes what he's got going on. So yeah, it was a very funny way to start the event. I liked it. It was the first question that anyone asked.
And it's very interesting too. It's kind of like role reversal. Going to, getting approval from the head football coach to Indiana is not something that you typically get, of course, with IU. I mean, maybe in the last several years, just because basketball hasn't been where fans would like it to be. They've had some decent seasons here and there, but now with Cignetti having the season that they had back in 2024, getting that kind of seal of approval in a sense. Plus, they both have some West Virginia ties. Of course, Cignetti was quarterback there years ago, and Darren DeVries, of course, most recent head coaching job with the Mountaineers. But back over to DeVries for basketball. Another thing that was announced before the Hoosiers at Hubers was that they'll be taking an off-season trip. They're allowed to do this every so many years. They're going to be doing one at Puerto Rico. Mike Woodson got to do this in his opening season. It did seem to prove beneficial, at least in some way, shape, or form. What's kind of your thoughts on these off-season trips? Is it as big of a deal as some people make it out to be, or is it just kind of a fun thing that teams get to do every now and again?
Well, I think it is kind of usually a fun thing the team gets to do every now and again, but I think this one is actually really important for Indiana for a couple of reasons. First of all, obviously the team is entirely new. Like these guys, there's a lot of good players on this team, but they've never played together before, any of them, except for the two guys from North Florida who had a little bit of experience, but that's about it. And so the question now becomes, okay, how do you get these guys to be ready for the start of the season? You don't want to basically give up on November and early December and be like, well, that was when we were getting our legs under us, getting our chemistry together, because those games count for your NCAA tournament resume, right? You have to hit the ground running. You don't have time to kind of just work your way into it. So this trip is extremely important for that. You get to play some games, but even more importantly than that, you get 10 extra practices. That's what comes with one of these trips. Is the NCAA allows 10 extra practices during the summer to get ready for the trip. And so I think that those are going to be huge for developing some chemistry between these guys and just kind of letting them get on the same page before the season starts. And then number two, beyond that, one of the sponsors or one of the people who put together this trip is the guy who runs BC Mega, which is the team from Serbia that they're going to be playing 2 games against when they're there. Now that team in Serbia has produced Nikola Jokic, or produced a bunch of other NBA guys. And what we've seen in college basketball over the last couple of years here, and especially this offseason, has been turbocharged, is European players coming over to the United States and playing college basketball, right? And so Indiana does not have any of those guys on their team this year, but it's a good bet that going forward, you're going to want some of those guys in your team, because now that the COVID seniors are washing out, the way to get veterans on your team, generally speaking, is going to be to get them from Europe. And so Indiana is making a really important connection here with the guy who runs this team, who's helped putting together this tournament. Like Darren DeVries can have his number on speed dial now, and they can make a connection to say, hey, you have a really good player you're excited about, send him our way. So tell him to come visit Indiana. We'll take a look at him, and we'll see if we can get him to come play for us. And so I think that those type of relationships with people in Europe, guys who run basketball teams in Europe, coaches in Europe, are going to be really important for recruiting going forward. So this is important for that as well.
You mentioned the COVID senior, and that's something that, it is definitely on its way out. It really should be all the way out, except for a few exceptions that do apply with Indiana basketball, unless I've missed something. Hopefully I've not. But Luke Goody and Anthony Leal, I can't remember. For some reason, I thought this previous season was his COVID year, and he's evidently, began applying for another. Am I mistaken in some way, shape, or form? Would this be Anthony Leal's 6th year if he was granted eligibility, or would it just be year number 5?
Yeah, it would be 6. And basically
Okay.
what his argument is a pretty similar one to Luke Goody, which is, and that's why they kind of think they're going to get both of them or neither of them, because they're making the same argument. And so Luke Goody had an injury that kept him out of most of the season when he was a sophomore. He came back at the end of the year and played 10 games, right? Now that's fewer than the threshold, but at the games were at the end of the season. Usually the NCAA says if the games are past the midway point, you're not allowed to get a red shirt. They're challenging that rule, basically. Anthony Leal, I believe it was his sophomore season where he only played 8 or 9 games. Part of that was because he wasn't playing. He wasn't part of the rotation. And the other part was he had some nagging injuries. But those games were spread out throughout the entire season. So it's the same kind of argument where it shouldn't matter when the games are played. If you played fewer than a quarter of your team's games, which is fewer than a third of your team's games, which is what the standard is in football, you should get a red shirt, right? Like football, it doesn't matter when you play your 4 games. You can play them anytime and still get a red shirt. So basically, Anthony Leal and Luke Goody are making the same argument. The only difference is that Anthony Leal is a year older. So he was in college for the COVID year, so he gets that extra year. So this will be his 6th year. It'll be Luke Goody's 5th year. He is technically not a COVID guy. He didn't come to college until after COVID was already over. So
Okay.
it basically it would be 6 for Leal, 5 for Goody, and that's extra year for Leal is the COVID year.
I just wish that they could get all of this eligibility stuff under control. I know relying on the NCAA to figure that out is probably, fishing for, heck, I don't even know what's something you fish for and wouldn't be able to get. Fishing for Moby Dick, I guess. Maybe that's something we could throw out there. But it's something that when you feel like you finally caught up with all the eligibility stuff, there's another wrench that's thrown in there. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. One other thing that Darren DeVries had mentioned, that even though Indiana is going to be kind of a smaller type of team as compared to what they're used to, they think they're going to be able to offset some of the issues they're going to have when it comes to undersized guys at the 5. What do you make of Indiana kind of making that transition into, a smaller team, something something fans haven't been able to or haven't been used to over the last several years?
Well, I think it's interesting to point out what DeVries said in regards to size, because he did say they're going to be undersized at the 5, but he thinks they're going to be pretty big 1 through 4. Like that, they're guys playing point guard, shooting guard, power forward, small forward. He thinks those guys are going to be big positionally, right? So they're going to have a lot of length, a lot of size at those positions. And so even though you're not going to have a guy out there who's 7 feet tall or something like that, you're going to have a lot of size on the court from that perspective, where you are going to be bigger on most nights at most positions than your opponent, right? And I think that that's going to help. You're going to be able to crash the glass with several different guys and be able to have your forwards and even your guards getting some rebounds and picking up some of the slack, right? That seems to be the idea. And then he also thinks that there are guys on the team who do play center, Sam Alexis among them, probably Reed Bailey to some extent among them, who do have enough size where they're not 7 feet, but they are broad and they are strong and they can go out there and get rebounds and battle down low. And so he thinks that that's kind of a piece with what he wants his team concept to be, which is we're going to play really hard and we're going to be tougher than you on most nights. And that is kind of the foundation of what DeVries wants his team to be. And so even though they don't have the size inside that Indiana is used to, he thinks there are ways to get around that and you're not going to be outmatched most nights, because that's what matters, right? It doesn't really matter
Yeah.
how big you are. It's, can you hold your own in the paint? And he thinks Indiana is going to be able to, despite the relative lack of size.
It kind of reminds me, and I'm sure some of my listeners are sick of me mentioning this because I do feel like I go this direction when it comes to comparing the way Indiana has rebuilt their roster. I go this direction quite a bit. But Pat Kelsey, I feel like, did the exact same thing with Louisville last year, and he was able to really create a team in his own image, and it was a team that was good enough to make the NCAA tournament. A lot of people thought they kind of got shafted when it came to their seed, and I would agree with that, even though the ACC wasn't a very good conference last year. But I think if Indiana can create a team that, even if it's not near the top of the Big Ten in year 1, if Darren DeVries is able to piece together something to where you can tell he's getting what he wants when it comes to style of play and he's getting success with it, I think that's the foundation that if you're a fan and you're wanting to see Indiana get back to where they were, in terms of being near the top of the conference and competing to eventually get to a Final Four, I think that's a way that you please fans here in the early goings here with Darren DeVries.
Yeah, and I think what's really important to talk about with Kelsey, because I think that is kind of the benchmark, right? Like it's a very similar situation. You come in, you have no one on the roster, you bring in almost entirely transfers, and you were able to get some really good players because you have NIL capital. But then how do you put them together, right? Like it's a very similar situation. And so that is the benchmark. And I do think that what Kelsey did was he had them playing incredibly hard early in the year, right? If Indiana fans will remember when they went to the Bahamas, and they play Louisville in that Battle for Atlantis game, Louisville was on them from the tip. You could tell within 3 possessions that Louisville's intensity was bothering the heck out of Indiana. And I think that is what you want to see from Indiana early in this season is, can you be, even if you're not completely comfortable with one another yet, because it's going to be really hard with that many new guys, even if you have not entirely installed what Darren DeVries wants to run offensively, can you be intense on the court? Can you be someone who, when the other team steps out there, this stinks for the other team? Even if the other team wins, they really did not like playing in that game. It was an unpleasant experience for them. And I think that is something that Indiana has not had for a little bit here, is just a team that is really hard and annoying to play against. And I think that there are the pieces involved for this team to be kind of like that. I've been a big proponent for the last couple of months since he committed of Tatum Connerway, who I think is exactly that type of player. The guy from Troy who was the Sun Belt Player of the Year. I think he is exactly that type of guy who just the other team sees him on tape and they roll their eyes and like, oh man, this guy, not this guy again. And Indiana has not had a ton of those guys, and I think they have several of them this year. I think it's going to make it an interesting season for IU.
I want to transition now into something still collegiate athletics related, but it's something that I've seen quite a bit on my social media timelines over the last several days for both basketball and football, and that is potential tournament expansion. Of course, college football playoff expansion. That seems to be very controversial. Greg Sankey kind of really laying out what he expects and how he feels the SEC is not getting enough credit, even though it feels like all they've ever done is get credit for things they have done or not done, whatever it may be. And on the other end, you have NCAA tournament expansion where you hear that could, as soon as this upcoming season, you could add 4 more teams, which in the grand scheme of things may not look like a big adjustment, but it also kind of feels like the first baby step in really expanding it to a much larger number down the road. I don't know if that's something they would actually do, but a lot of people have that fear that those in charge of creating the NCAA tournament will eventually go down that route. So we'll start with college football, since I mentioned that first. What do you make of, first of all, college football playoff expansion in general, and then how Greg Sankey has kind of been spearheading this entire thing?
So with college football expansion, I really don't have a particular problem with it. I mean, 12 was fine. Like we did 1 year of 12. I thought it went relatively well. There were some good games in there. I think they're moving to straight seeding this year. So
which I think is a good decision. I'll say that too.
I think that's perfectly fine. I don't really understand the need to go to 16 teams so quickly, but that seems to be the direction we're headed. And the only question now is how is the format for the 16 teams. I think 16 teams in general is fine. What I don't want is the thing where the spots are guaranteed. 4 for the Big 10, 4 for the SEC, 2 for the Big 12, 2 for the ACC, 1 for the Group of 5, and 3 at-larges. That to me, I don't like that at all. I think it is totally against the spirit of competition. If you're the SEC or the Big 10, why are you worried about getting 4 in? You should have 4 in every year in a 16-team format. The SEC would have had 5 last year, or 6 in a 16-team format, right? Like it's wild to me that they're insisting on that, and I don't think that's going to happen. Frank, I think you just do, if you do the what they're calling the 5+11 model, which is automatic bids for the five highest ranked conference champions, which is what we're doing now, and then 11 at-larges. I think that's fine. It really, really is fine, and I think we're probably going to end up there. And if that is the case, I think we've landed on a pretty good situation. We can go from there. If they do the 4-4 and 2-2, that to me is just ridiculous. I don't understand it, and I'll be annoyed, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, especially because it's definitely, when you look at last year, you think, okay, the top 4 SEC and Big 10 teams, they're definitely, you would think they'd be worthy to be in a playoff competition in terms of, how well their regular season was. But if you ever get an off year where maybe after your top 2 or 3 and you get to number 4, your 4th best team, especially in the Big 10 in most years, could be a number of different teams. And at that point, you're just kind of putting another throwaway team in there if you're guaranteeing another spot for a conference. So it's become very politically charged, and that's unfortunate for anything regarding college sports. I feel like, where it's as if you had SEC and Big 10 with being Democrats and Republicans. It's very annoying seeing them argue and go back and forth about all these different things. And I think I'm with you, though. I hope they end up just kind of, they're definitely going to go with the 16, but if you can kind of shy away from doing the auto or the certain amount of auto bids for each conference, that's probably the smartest way to go with all of that. So we are in agreement in that regard. But moving over to college basketball tournament expansion now, that's where I think a lot of the purists when it comes to the NCAA tournament, and I'd be one of these people, think right now the tournament is perfect as is. There's no reason to add or subtract any more teams from what you've already got. Now, some people would argue the first 4 is unnecessary, but we have seen teams come out of the first 4 and go all the way to the final 4. So that argument kind of puts itself to bed right there. What are kind of your thoughts on if they do expand? Do you think adding 4 teams this upcoming season is just the first step, or do you think it's just, the end game for a little while.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you would like to think it's what they're looking for, but it's probably a prelude to something bigger, right? Here's the thing with the NCAA, like, more basketball is generally speaking good. I don't really have a huge issue with going to 72. I like it the way it is, but I don't think adding 4 more play-in games is going to really harm the overall product. What I do think is what they need to be careful of is and this is kind of a weird esoteric kind of situation here, but what they need to be careful of is so much of the NCAA tournament is wrapped up in people filling out brackets, and adding more teams is going to make the bracket more complicated. Right now, it's very like, people intuitively understand how this works. If you keep adding more teams, it's going to be harder and more confusing to fill out a bracket for people who are not paying attention to this. And that is so much of the lifeblood of what makes this tournament. So they need to be careful of that. And if you expand to 72, now you have 8 play-in games. Generally speaking, in the past, like the bracket challenge stuff, you just ignore the play-ins and you wait until after that. But is that something that's going to go away? Are you going to have to consider the play-ins now? I think this is something, as weird as it sounds, the NCAA is going to have to look at that and be like, at what point are casual fans going to tune out because they don't understand the bracket anymore? And you have to be really careful of that, because that is so much of what makes this tournament special, is people who don't really follow college basketball watching this on the Thursday of the first round because there's 16 games on and they filled out a bracket, right? So that is something that the sport needs to be careful of, because you can get away from that pretty easily.
Another argument too, and then we'll wrap this thing up, is that you're adding teams where, when people are already making the argument that the teams that are getting put into the first 4, at least in some years compared to others, they're not deserving of being in the tournament in the first place, just because the talent gap has seemingly kind of gotten a little bit wider, it seems like, when it comes to the best teams in college basketball, the mediocre to the worst. And so throwing in a few more other mediocre to below average teams in, what does that really do for the NCAA tournament other than just have a few more games? Again, it's more TV revenue for whoever the networks are when you're broadcasting these games. I understand that. But at what point does the product become oversaturated? I don't know if they're worried about that necessarily, but I do think you could get to a point to where that becomes an issue.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You're not adding potential championship contenders to the tournament.
No.
Right? Like North Carolina last year, we all got mad at that. They won 23 games, but they went 1-13 in quad ones. They blew out San Diego State in their play-in game and then lost in the first round. Like, you're not adding national championship contenders. So in reality, you're not upping the competition factor at all. You're just like adding more games for people to watch. It's like, all right, you guys will watch anything. We're going to throw it out there and watch. It's like adding more bowl games to college football. It has nothing to do with the national championship, right? It's just more stuff to be on TV. And I guess that is something the networks have to be concerned about, because like that is their job, is to put more stuff on TV. But that it does seem a little bit pointless to me. Like, I don't really have a problem with it per se, because I don't think it makes the product worse, but it doesn't make it better. And so in that case, why are we doing it, right?
Dylan, anything you'd like to promote before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, always, we are journalgazette.net. I cover IU, Purdue, Notre Dame. I will have a series starting next week, continuing for the rest of the summer, which is off-season roster resets for IU, Purdue, Notre Dame, men's and women's basketball, and football as well. So check out those. We'll have about 2 every week. So looking forward to that. Just kind of letting you know, here's all of the transfer stuff that happened. Here's how the roster looks for each of those teams individually.
And I'm excited. I mean, we're only a month and a half away from Big Ten football media days, so we'll definitely be keeping in touch as things get closer to that. And I'm looking forward to restarting a new collegiate athletics calendar here in just a few short weeks. So, Dylan, I appreciate your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely, John. Looking forward to it.
Big thanks to Dylan Sinn for his insight on Indiana football and basketball, as well as everything going on with all the discussions surrounding NCAA, or the college football playoff expansion, and the NCAA tournament. My gosh, I feel like it's inevitable, the NCAA tournament expansion, and it feels like longtime fan consideration, it doesn't even matter. It's all about the money, and I guess it always will be. So if that's where college athletics are going, which it's where they have been going. But it just kind of feels like this would be a step too far. But maybe I'm just being naive and not aligning with the times or whatever. But we'll see. Let's go ahead and transition. We're going to talk more NBA throughout the rest of the show. And I'm sure, I mean, during the regular season, we don't talk a lot of Pacers. But who would have thought that the Indiana Pacers would have not only figured things out midway through the season, but have parlayed all of this into an NBA Finals appearance, their second one in their entire franchise history. And we're going to start that conversation right now with the Hoosier.com's own Drew Rosenberg, and then we'll catch up with Dustin Schutte and get his perspective on things right afterwards. So let's go ahead and get into this conversation with our friend Drew. And we got a lot to talk about what's going on, not only in Game 6, but throughout this entire playoffs with the Indiana Pacers. Joining me once again from the Hoosier.com, it is Drew Rosenberg. And, he normally, just like myself, talks Indiana athletics with Kyler Staley on talking about the Hoosiers. But when I have him on here on In Touch with Indiana Sports, this is his opportunity to talk a little more NBA. And I cannot believe, not only are we talking about the NBA Finals today, or the upcoming NBA Finals, but we're talking about a finals that will feature the Indiana Pacers for the first time since the year 2000. Either them or Oklahoma City will win their first ever NBA title. And I feel like we got a lot to get into today, Drew. But first of all, you and I were talking about this right before we started hitting record. And whenever I started having you on at the beginning of the NBA season, I was having you on for other things, but I remember you mentioned, like, I'm your NBA guy. Have me on for NBA talk. And the Indiana Pacers, kind of similar to last season, they struggled. They didn't look like they were really going to be potentially even a playoffs contender. And now here they are staring at the face a 7-game series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, against MVP Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, for what is shaping up to be a really fun NBA Finals here in just a few days.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought on December 31st, when the Pacers were 16-18, that, fast forward 6 months later, we'd be talking about them, playing for a chance to win their first NBA championship. It's an unreal turnaround, but it's funny. I call it a turnaround, but it's, not that much of a turnaround as you kind of expect. No real acquisitions. It was just Halliburton, had a really slow start to the year, and then he turned up in a big way. And this Pacers team, they're so much fun, and they play such a fun brand of basketball. I mean, we've talked about Indiana basketball, so much, and the style they've played. The Pacers do the exact opposite. I mean, they push the floor, they shoot the three ball at a high level, and they just share the basketball. And it all starts from Tyrese. He's, one of those superstars. I call him a 6'6" Steve Nash, because he is a pass first to the most. I mean, in the most you can be, pass first as much as possible, where it's, the thing is he has to be more aggressive. And it's every time they have a chance, they make the extra pass. And it's such a fun team to watch. And I'm really excited to get to watch them in the finals.
I feel like there was a lot of pressure on this team in Game 6 the other night. And just because one thing I talked about with somebody else, with Tyler Smith, most recent episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, it feels like the narrative when it comes to all these 7-game series, the national perspective is always in favor of who won the most recent game. And so a lot of people thought there was this pressure that if the Pacers did not win Game 6 and went to a Game 7, that it was going to be all momentum, and it would have been momentum, would have been shifted over to the Knicks for sure, but people would have absolutely counted out Indiana in a Game 7 situation. So the fact that they were able to close out, win on their home floor, which, as Reggie Miller talked about last night, whenever his team went to the NBA Finals in the year 2000, they did it on the road, once again in 6 games against the Knicks, though. This is brand new territory that Indiana was in last night, and I want to say almost from start to finish, looked like a team that was not only better than the Knicks, but ready to take on what's coming their way with Oklahoma City here in just a few days. What did you make of what happened the other night in Game 6?
Yeah, I mean, the Pacers took care of business. It started with Halliburton. After he really, just the thing with Halliburton you talk about is the consistency, and that's where, the next step is. And we saw Game 5, he struggled, was, really a non-factor and a bad loss for the Pacers in a game that really just, couldn't get within striking range. And he, got back to himself, was aggressive early, let the game come to him, and 13 assists, 21 points. That's a Tyrese Halliburton game. But then it's the other guys. Pascal Siakam won conference final, the Larry Bird Award, which was, I was a little shocked by it, but he was a little more consistent. I don't know if you saw the vote split. It was 5-4.
I did see that, yes.
So really close award split there, but then you go across the board. The Pacers shot 51% from three. You got good contributions just across the board, even off the bench. Thomas Bryant, former Hoosier, was awesome, hit 3 threes. And then Obi Toppin also 18 points off the bench. When you're getting that contribution across the board, it makes you so tough to stop, especially for an offense like the Pacers. They play such a high octane basketball. And you look across the board, most NBA teams are 6-7 guys they can really rely on. You go across the Pacers, it feels like every single game it's another guy. Like Thomas Bryant, last night was doing that. We're recording Sunday, but this is going to be Monday. So it's 2 nights ago. But Ben Mathurin in game 4 and game 5 was great. So it's the Pacers have so many guys that it's, it makes up for them maybe not having the true, alpha superstar scorer. Because I do think Tyrese Halliburton is an alpha and is a, number one option. But his play style isn't really of that, where he's not going to, he can give you the 30-point games, but he's not like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, a Giannis, a Jokic that's going to consistently score 35, 30, or 40 points a game.
So whenever, I guess, since you're kind of segueing me into it, when you have this series that's going to begin later this week against the Thunder, what's the number one thing that Indiana has to do? Obviously, they want to be able to assert their will and play their high-octane offense style of basketball. They want to be able to do that against one of the more tenacious defenses when it comes to Oklahoma City. But outside of just those two general perspectives, what's the number one thing Indiana has to be able to limit? Can you limit Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Is there a formula to kind of slowing him down a little bit? Or if you're able to do that, who's OKC's number 2 threat? Who are they going to go to if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is having a bad night?
I mean, it's Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren. Jalen Williams, first-time All-Star this year, really, really good scorer. But the thing with the Thunder that you look across that makes them so tough is defensively they are monsters. This is probably the best defensive basketball team we've seen the last 5 years. It's one of the best in history. I'm pretty sure the advanced numbers highlight that too, but you look across the board, they just have so many guys who can defend at a high level. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a really good defender, but then it's not even just him. It's Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, Alex Caruso. They have so many guys they can throw at Tyrese Halliburton, Nembhard, that's where the interesting matchup comes in. How does Tyrese Halliburton handle it when he has, so many elite defenders being thrown his way? It's the same thing that pretty much the Pacers did to Jalen Brunson, where they're throwing Nesmith, Nembhard, Ben Mathurin. They're throwing so many different guys at Brunson. That's what the Thunder are going to do to the Pacers. And I saw this comparison. The Pacers and Thunder they're pretty similar, like the way they play and the way their rosters are constructed. Obviously, the Thunder have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, which, the MVP that takes them to another level, and they're, historically good team. But this Pacers team has a lot of guys. I mean, I mentioned Ben Mathurin, Nembhard, Nesmith. They can throw those guys at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but it's staying out of foul trouble. Brunson, is a really good, people call him a foul baiter, really good at drawing fouls. So is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So, you got practice with one of the best foul drawers in the league, and now in the championship, you get to go against the best foul drawer in the NBA.
So one thing that I'm sure is going to get brought up, probably not just by me, but by everybody, is that the Pacers are obviously they're deserving of being here in the NBA Finals, but they wouldn't be here if it weren't for 3 different miracle games, if you will, from each of their different opponents: the Bucks, the Cavs, and then the New York Knicks. Do you think they're going to have at least fourth time's a charm, I guess, whatever you want to refer to it as? Are they going to have a game where they are just playing, not necessarily playing out of their minds, but just you have kind of that extra little, a miracle shot or whatever it may be? Are they going to have another one of those to defeat this Thunder team, or do you think that they can just is there enough firepower with the Pacers to where they can just win outright every single time if they want to?
I think they're going to have to play an extremely high level. This Thunder team is one of the best teams we've seen in the last 10 years. The numbers support that too. I don't know if you saw this stat. The Thunder currently, including the playoffs, have 80 wins right now. If they win the championship, they will have the most wins of an NBA champion since the 95-96 Bulls. So Michael Jordan,
Wow.
prime Bulls. The only other team with more is that Warriors team that lost in Game 7 to LeBron in 2016. So this Thunder team is historically good on the defensive end, but then they also, have a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, one of the best offensive players in the league, Jalen Williams, J-Dub, 20 point per game scorer, Chet Holmgren. And I think the scariest part with this Thunder team is they're so young. They have so many more draft picks that they probably are only going to get better. And this Pacers team, they're capable. Like, they play up to competition. Every time I watch the Pacers, I feel like they play at the level of their competition. So I think they are good enough to compete, and they will. But they're going to have to play such a high level of basketball. You can't turn the ball over against the Thunder. And that's Tyrese Halliburton's biggest strength. It's, is he able to take care of the ball like he's been doing throughout his entire career? Or is Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, Caruso, are they going to cause problems and force some turnovers? Because that's when the Thunder are out at their best, when they're forcing turnovers.
And there's something odd about this team, at least when it comes to, and it's probably just the momentum from this particular NBA playoffs, but these Pacers, when they're on the road, it's almost like they seem like they're more dialed in than when they're at home. Now, I'll say that's a little bit different. Game 6 the other night, they were definitely dialed in. They knew that for them, it was a Game 7 situation. They knew that they wanted to get things taken care of for them while they were at home. But for some reason, and it doesn't matter if it was against the Bucks, Cavs, Knicks, whatever, they just look like they're not intimidated by being on the road, especially when you just got done playing in the Garden. Yes, they got ran out in Game 5, but I mean, obviously, you're going to have to at least steal a game on the road whenever you're in this type of situation where you're going to have less home games. But I almost feel like these first couple of games, if you can do, and I'm not expecting them to do this, I'm just saying that there is that possibility based on what has happened already in this playoffs. But do you think at all it is, with the way that they seem to play in road environments, do you think winning 1 or 2 games on the road is realistic for this team?
Yeah, I think so. I think, the Pacers are kind of have that road dog mentality. I mean, they went into New York and took 2 games. New York is probably, Madison Square Garden is probably one of the hardest places you can play in basketball, much less in the playoffs. So, the Thunder, it's not going to be anything new going into that atmosphere. It's, Oklahoma City is going to be rocking. And we've seen their fan base throughout the playoffs. They've shown out. I mean, they always show out. It's, for being a small market, they have one of the best fan bases in basketball.
2 small market teams here. I didn't even mention that yet here in the NBA Finals.
And it's 2 small market teams that have great fan bases, and that's what makes it so exciting. Rick Carlisle, I think he said it after the game, the 49 states, it's just basketball. So it's really fun. You're going to have 2 electric atmospheres, and the Pacers play up to that. When the atmosphere gets going, they play at their best. So they are going to have to steal a game on the road, and it's no secret. You can't win the series if you don't. But I think if they don't steal game 1 or 2, it could be a really quick series.
Yeah, and I've asked this before, and I've never, for some reason, I haven't bothered to look this up on my own. I know the NBA Finals used to be, and maybe it still is, it used to be first 2 games were at Oklahoma City, or, the team that had the advantage. The next 3 were all at what would be the Pacers, and then you do the last 2 at home. They don't do that format anymore, right? It's still 2-2-1-1-1.
Yeah, 2-2-1-1-1.
Okay. Yeah, because that's odd. I remember back when that was a thing, I always thought that was an interesting way for a couple of reasons. Because, one, if the team with the advantage is that much better than the team without the road or the home court advantage, there's a pretty high likely chance that team is going to end the series in their away arena, which seems, first of all, it's an unfit thing to do, but also if the underdog, or again, the team without the advantage, steals one of the first 2 games on the road, then there's a chance that they could get really hot and have kind of their own home court advantage by having 3 straight home games. So I guess it makes sense that they've moved away from that, and I'm glad they have. It's just one thing I'd been thinking about as I knew the finals were approaching, because I always thought it was weird when they transitioned, whenever they switched up the format. I just never understood why that was the case.
Yeah, I think originally it was like travel, because Eastern Conference, Western Conference. It's if you get, like, for example, Celtics, Lakers, you're traveling across the country. In the 90s, 2000, or, travel is probably not as easy, but I know the MLB still does it today too. I think the World Series is still 2-2 or 2-3-2.
That's silly. Just spread the games out, which I guess is probably what the NBA has done.
Yeah,
to allow for travel and that sort of thing. But I guess I'll go and ask you this now. If Pacers get this done, I know part of it is you guys still on the road, but what's it going to look like if Indiana is able to pull this out and win their first NBA championship?
Yeah, you look at what the Thunder are probably going to do. They're going to probably try to make Tyrese Halliburton beat him as a scorer. I think that's, the obvious game plan. They're going to try to make Halliburton say one-on-one against our best defenders, can you score? Halliburton's going to have to be efficient scoring the ball, but he also is going to have to keep the turnovers down. He always does it, but this Oklahoma City Thunder team, I want to say they're on pace to have the best turnover differential in a playoff run in NBA history. I saw that on Twitter. I can't remember who tweeted it, but whoever did, I think it might have been NBA University, but great follow there. But this Pacers team, they have to have the others step up too. Pascal Siakam has to continue his play, and I don't really have doubts on him. It's more so the guys who've never been here. The Aaron Nesmith, Miles Turner, Aaron Nemhard, Obi Toppin, Ben Mathurin. How do these guys show up in the finals when the lights are brightest? Because, the Eastern Conference Finals playing on Madison Square Garden, the lights are certainly bright. But getting to the finals, it's very different. And having a guy like Pascal Siakam and Thomas Bryant, who've both been there and won a championship on the roster, definitely helps. The Thunder, they only have Alex Caruso, who's won a title. So, most of the key guys in this series, with the exception of Siakam, are new to this spotlight. So it's who handles it best.
But you also got Rick Carlisle, somebody who won an NBA Finals with the Mavericks. He's been a part of 6 NBA Finals, which I don't know. Again, this is coming from I don't want to say I'm an NBA noob, but I'm more of an NBA casual. I didn't realize how much he had been involved with some championship level teams. And I think that plays a really big advantage for the Pacers as well. Just having somebody who's probably going to be a very kind of calming demeanor on the sidelines, especially when things get anxious. I'm sure whenever we get to Thursday, there's going to be some nerves from both sides, of course. There's going to be that pressure on Oklahoma City to come out and win their first game at home. I'm sure Pacers will be playing with a chip on their shoulder, but the pressure is going to be on the Pacers to not get blown out in game one. And I'm not saying that they would get blown out, but when you're kind of seen as this magical team story, whatever you want to call it, and you've made it all the way to the championship series, the last thing you want to do is lose by 30 or 40 points in your first game against a heavy favorite to win the entire thing. And I'm not saying, the narrative would be at that point that the Pacers are outmatched. They could certainly figure things out and make it a series, but you don't want to go into game one and have that scenario play out where Oklahoma City looks like they're going to run away with the entire thing.
Yeah, it's who settles in first under the lights. It's going to be a huge part because both teams have the ability of throwing that knockout punch and going on that 15-0 run and put a game away. So who can settle in first? And if it's the Thunder, it could get ugly quick, as you mentioned. But the same thing could be true for the Pacers. Pacers could go up 20 and just, ride along to that and coast to a win. But you mentioned Rick Carlisle, and I think he is, kind of the underrated part of this series. Oklahoma City Thunder coach Mark Daigneault, unbelievable coach, one of the best coaches in the NBA. But Carlisle, there was a moment last night that really stuck out to me. I don't know if you saw this. It was a pick and roll with Jalen Brunson was the guarding the screener. He had a hard hedge, and Siakam just attacked the hedge, went right around him, and a little drop pass for an easy dunk. And you could tell right away that was the game plan. They're going to attack Brunson on the hedges. But if you look to the bench, the entire bench went over and pretty much hyping up Rick Carlisle, who's sitting down watching the play yeah, you told us to do that. You told us it would work. And it's just the little things like that. This team gets behind Carlisle. I still to this day don't, Jason Kidd's not a bad coach, nothing against him. I just never understood why the Mavericks fired Rick Carlisle and why they let him go. I still think he is one of the best coaches in basketball, and he's proving it once again. This Pacers team, you look at sheer talent, they're not on the level of the Thunder. They're not on the level of the Knicks. They're not on the level of the Celtics. But coaching and the way they play, it makes it, shortens that gap a bit. And I think we talked about this a bit. How much does coaching actually matter in the NBA? And this is a perfect example. Rick Carlisle is showing why, there's levels to this.
I do want to ask you, because I know you're not a Pacers fan, and I'm a Pacers casual, but I still don't want to throw this in there. But for someone like you, you're a Celtics guy, and you're kind of watching this, I don't want to say from afar, because you're definitely following along with what the Pacers are doing. But how do you, if I'm asking you to predict the series, who comes out on top in how many games, what would you say would happen at this point in time?
Yeah, I really hate to say it because I would love to see this Pacers team win. I'm rooting for this Pacers team to win. Tyrese Halliburton is one of my favorite players in the league. They're so fun to watch, but this Thunder team, it feels inevitable.
Yeah.
Since the Cavs and Celtics went down, even this Thunder team, just the amount of bodies they can throw at you, it's and what they did in the West. I thought Timberwolves might be able to stop them, and they just handle them in 5. I lean Thunder in 5 and 6, that kind of range. I'll go official Thunder in 6, just because I know the Pacers, when they're at their highest level, they can beat anyone, and they can have that game like Game 6 last night where they shot 50% from 3, and I think they'll have at least one, maybe, and Halliburton will probably have a game that he's anchors them to a win. I don't think it's going to be a sweep. I think this Pacers team, the way they play up to competition, is going to keep them in the series. But this Thunder team just feels so dominant, and I just really haven't seen a team like this in a long time.
Well, see, it is. I mean, in a way, it's weird saying it's a David versus Goliath because they are two small market teams. So, like, in theory, it shouldn't feel that way. But when you talk about the Oklahoma City's dominance, that's where that part comes into play. But it's going to be fun to watch. I'm excited for game 1. Again, I hope it doesn't play out in the nightmare scenario that I laid out. That's just kind of the pessimist in me that has to throw that scenario out there sometimes. But Drew, I appreciate you as always. Well, definitely, I've been trying to rotate between you and Tyler Smith. You two are my NBA/Pacers guys. But if depending on where we're at here in a couple of weeks, we'll definitely check in. And I guess I don't have right in front of me how the playoffs, the final schedule will play out, but I'm assuming we'll be kind of where we are right now. If the series has continued on for this long, either we'll have a winner in a 6th game, or we'll be heading to a game 7 the next time you and I talk, if I'm not mistaken. But we'll have to wait and see how things shape out, of course. But either way, I appreciate you, and I'll let you say some final words too. I know I'm kind of playing us out, but I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, no, yeah. Thank you for having me as always. This is going to be such a fun finals. The play style of two teams, it's going to be a really exciting brand of basketball. And I know a lot of people, they look at the NBA, they're like, oh, the NBA doesn't defend. I'm not going to go into that argument. I'm just going to say, watch the Thunder team. The way they defend, the way they switch. I think Rick Pitino said it. This is like one of the few times in his career he's used an NBA team to teach defense, and use the Thunder for their ability to switch and just how tenacious they are on the defensive end. But this Pacers team is one of the best offenses. We see it's year after year too. The last 2 years, they've probably been the best offense in basketball. So it's, an unstoppable object versus an immovable force. So it's going to be really fun to watch.
I like that. Drew, I appreciate you once again. Check out Talking About the Hoosiers. Y'all released something a couple of days ago, if I'm not mistaken. Y'all talked about Darian DeVries and all that was said during the Hoosiers and Hubers, all that good stuff. So check that out if you want more Drew, if you want more Kyler Staley. And, of course, as always, check out all the stuff being put out on thehoosier.com. And, Drew, we'll check in again with you here in the next couple of weeks. Again, a big thanks to Drew Rosenberg for his NBA insight. And we'll definitely check in with him if the Pacers can, hopefully they just do well, do something, make this a competitive series, maybe even win the whole thing. But I know somebody who would be over the moon if not only they made this a competitive series, but if they found a way to win the entire thing. And that is our friend Dustin Schutte. And I'm excited to have him back on the show for the first time in a while right now. So let's go ahead and welcome in our friend, the one, the only, Mr. Dustin Schutte. Joining me now is resident Indiana Pacers fan, Dustin Schutte. Haven't had you on in a bit, my friend, but glad to have you here on In Touch with Indiana Sports.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. And I think, John, this is the first time we've had a chance to chat since you've welcomed someone new into your life. So first of all, thank you for having me on to talk about the Pacers a little bit, but also, how is fatherhood?
That is true. Yeah, fatherhood. I mean, I can't believe it. She's already, this past Friday, she turned 7 weeks old, our little Daisy, and she is doing just fine. It is, I will say this, it is unfortunate that you and her do not get to be birthday twins as was originally forecasted. But either way, she's doing just fine right now.
That's great. I'm glad to hear it. Glad to hear everybody's doing well, and I'm sure there's a lot of sleepless nights, but you look good. You look like you're getting some rest.
I do my best, especially on the weekends, to catch up on sleep whenever I can, and I'm feeling good today. And I'm sure you're feeling even better, being somebody who is a longtime Pacers sufferer and maybe I shouldn't phrase it like that, because it's not like the Pacers have been horrible forever, but I mean, they don't have the best histories like the Knicks or the Celtics may have, the Lakers, all the biggest teams in the NBA. They do have, of course, before now, one NBA Finals appearance back in the year 2000, but this magical run that they have been on throughout this NBA playoffs, I guess before I ask you about that, what has the ride been like for you as somebody who is a Pacers fan and seeing everything play out from the last second shots, all the heroics, the improbable comebacks? What has all this been like for you to experience as a Pacers fan?
I'm going to preface this by saying that journalistic Dustin goes out the window when the Pacers are playing. So just there will be no unbiased here. There's not going to be a level head about some of these responses, but
that's why I'm having you on here.
It was really fun. So early in the season, they were dealing with some injuries, and they continued to get hit by the injury bug throughout the season. Isaiah Jackson was probably the biggest one. And I think they were off to a 10-15 start, if I remember correctly. And it was like, at first I'm like, okay, was last year, like, was that a one-hit wonder type of thing where maybe teams didn't know how to keep up with them offensively and their defense was so bad that teams have just kind of figured them out? But it turns out that, you know, when you're at full strength and everybody's healthy, I think Pascal Siakam dealt with some injury stuff. I think there's some other guys, Nembhard, Nesmith, I think dealt with some injuries earlier in the season. It's 82 games in like 8 months is a long season. So I don't remember every little intricacy about the beginning of the year, but it was kind of like this, oh shoot, maybe they were right about us. Maybe the East wasn't very good. Maybe, you know, we took advantage of some situations last year, because obviously last year in the playoffs, the Bucks dealt with some injuries. Last year, OG Anunoby, who a lot of the people watching your show are going to be familiar with, was out for that Knicks series, and then they got swept by the eventual champions in the Boston Celtics. So it was some rough times, and I kind of questioned, like, how's the season going to go? But as they continued, it just like they just started to gel. And I think since the turn of the calendar, since we got to 2025, the Pacers and the Thunder are the two best teams in the NBA, the teams with the best records, I should say, in the NBA. And what to me has been exciting about this is we talk about the last second shots, right? Like how they snatched victory out of the jaws of defeat in
Three
the
times,
win against,
I feel like.
in that win against Milwaukee in the first round. At the end of the game to close that series out 4-1. And then that unbelievable comeback in Cleveland. What was that, game 2, I think, to win that game on the road with the Halliburton buzzer beater. And then game 1 in the Garden, down 14 with like a minute and a half left. And to overcome that on that Halliburton shot and to give him the choke sign, it was so exciting. But I think what's made it even – there's a couple things that have made this even better. One is that it just looks like when I watch sports, I am energized by this group because they look like they get along so well. They look like they're genuinely friends or a family. And that doesn't mean that families don't fight every once in a while. It doesn't mean they don't have disagreements. Doesn't mean they don't have rough patches. But it just looks like they're having so much fun. Like it reminds me, Tyrese Halliburton has said this, like a lot of people compare them to a college team because of how close they are. I would think it's even more of like a high school team. Like when you're playing high school basketball, that's just you and your best, like that's you and your buddies, right? And so that's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of like a really good Indiana high school basketball team. And I think that's why the entire city and the state loves this team so much. The other part of it too is that they're just so young. And so to me, when the Pacers went to the finals in 2000, that was an older team. So you kind of got the feeling like they've got to win it this year or it's just not going to happen. And they got to the finals, and that was cool to see Reggie get there and Rick Smits and the Davis boys and Jalen Rose and all those guys. But they just ran into Kobe and Shaq, a younger, more heavy-hitting LA Lakers team.
I mean, all-timers right there.
Yeah. And that team, it felt like, okay, that's the end of that chapter. And we don't know when they're going to get back. And it took them 25 years to get back. And I was talking about this today with Abby, my fiance, and she said, if the I know you want the Pacers to win, but if they don't win, are you happy with them just getting there? And I said, yes, because it's always bittersweet because you want them to win, right? If they get there, you want them to win because you don't know when you're going to get that chance again. But at the same time, yes, because it feels like this team is so young, and I think they're going to keep so many of these guys together that they can do this for the next 5 to 7 years.
And that is something, like you mentioned, that anytime you have a magical run, especially in professional sports, NBA, NFL, whatever it may be, depending on where certain players are at in their contracts, you don't know which important pieces are going to be coming back in years to come. But you mentioned the youth of this team. It does kind of add an element of, oh, there's a lot of future potential here, but you also don't want to take for granted where they're at right now. At the same time, you want to appreciate it, but you also want to understand, which I believe you do, that this may or may not happen. Like, I think they're going to continue to be good in years to come, but I mean, there's definitely been, I don't even want to say a little bit of luck. There's a lot of luck that came into play that I don't want to say they wouldn't have been able to get it done, but especially when you look at game 1 with the Knicks, I feel like this entire series that just happened might have looked a little bit different had you not had that comeback with a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I don't know how much it would have changed if, let's say, Tyrese's shot doesn't go in. I still think they win game 2.
And they definitely could have, too. I agree with you there.
The reason I think that is because I think even if you lose that game, you say, if we can do that for 48 minutes, what we did in those last 2 minutes. Now, obviously, there was a little bit of franticness. You're going to have yakety sax playing in the background for that long of a basketball game. But I think that they were able to gain some of that momentum that they needed to go into game 2 and say, hey, if we're able to play this way, we let this one slip away. But if we can channel this for 4 quarters, we have a great shot to win this series. Now, obviously, it helps that they won that game. And I think, I don't know. Maybe we're talking about.
You could also argue that they would have won game 3 potentially, as opposed to losing game 3.
Yeah, because there's more at stake. To keep home court advantage, you have to win then both of your home games. In that scenario, they just had to win one to maintain home court advantage. So I completely agree with you. It could have been 1-1, and we could be talking about a game 7. The Pacers could have still closed it out in 6. You're right. It could have been a different series. Maybe the Pacers say, I don't know. I don't know if we can beat the Knicks. But to me, as young as they are a resilient bunch. I think the one thing that you're worried about in maybe the future, or even if this next series with the NBA Finals against the Oklahoma City Thunder is like, sometimes I think you can get too comfortable with those kind of outcomes, and you can't expect that you're just going to be able to turn it on with the last 3 minutes every game. And I think that happened a little bit in game 5, where it was like, oh, we've been in this situation before. We'll cut it down to, 8 points with 2.5 minutes to go, and we'll be just fine. We'll be in the game. And it didn't happen. Maybe game 5 was a wake-up call. Maybe that loss kind of served as a wake-up call for them, not just for game 6, but then going forward into the NBA Finals, where it's like, no, we got to play well for 4 quarters. We can't just, we can't get down 15 points and hope that we hit a bunch of threes with 3 minutes to go, because the likelihood and the chances of that actually happening are slim.
Well, I want to ask you now, as things shift to the NBA Finals, game 1 being this upcoming Thursday, how are you feeling about their chances? I was talking about this with Drew earlier. You have the best offense versus the best defense. You also have the best record in the NBA with the Oklahoma City Thunder. You have 2 small market teams. One team will win their first ever NBA championship. There's a lot of storylines to follow here. How are you feeling? I mean, I know a lot of Pacers fans are feeling good. As a Pacers casual, I'm feeling good. But what are you expecting heading into game 1?
Well, first of all, anybody that says they're not watching this series because it's 2 small market teams is an idiot. Like, I'm just going to throw that. Like, I think you're a stupid person if that's what you say. Because these are 2, like, this would be an exciting brand of bet. If you put these 2 teams in like the NCAA national championship game, everybody would watch, because it would be the most exciting. But because it's Oklahoma City and because it's Indianapolis, people are going to say, it's not a big market. It's not the Lakers. It's not the Knicks. It's not the, we'll throw another big market. It's not the Bulls, whatever. I'm not going to watch. And you're like, if you are a true basketball fan, this is the kind of series you're thirsting for, because it's going to be fast paced, up and down. Like you said, the Pacers offense, against the Thunder defense. You're going to have the MVP of the league. You're going to have a couple of the league's up-and-coming stars like Tyrese Halliburton. Like, I'm excited about this series. Now, what I will say is my gut feeling is that the Pacers are not going to win the series. That is me as just a realistic fan saying, I think that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is, to me, I think these two teams are even. And usually when you have a pretty even matchup, the team with the best player is going to win the game / the series. And I do think that Oklahoma City has the best player. So right now as we record this, I'm excited. I think it's going to be a really good series. I'm going to give the edge to Oklahoma City. Now ask me on Thursday, or what day is it? Wednesday or Thursday it's the
Thursday,
8th.
right?
So,
I think it's Thursday.
Or the 5th. Yeah, it's June 5th. So whatever day that falls on, I'll have it in my calendar so I won't miss the game. But ask me again that day, and I'm going to be all in on the Pacers. And the Pacers are going to sweep the series. Like that's how much it changes, because leading up to it, I can be a logical thinker. Like I thought the Pacers would win every series they played. I didn't think they'd win them in 5 games, but I thought they would win every series they played. And then I got here and I'm like, I think Oklahoma City's probably the better team, probably going to win this series. But then when we get to game day, it's like, oh man, we're going to sweep this team. This team is junk. We are going to take them to the woodshed.
Do you think they need, so they've had one miracle type of play and or comeback in every series so far. Do you think they need another one against the Thunder?
Well, what I think, I don't think they need it. I think if you play like you did in game 6, if you play like you did in game 4, I don't think you need one of those moments. But what I do think is those moments, now maybe Oklahoma City is too mature, because we saw Oklahoma City get waxed by like 40 points by the Thunder, and they bounced back and wait, what did I just say?
You mean by the Timberwolves? By the Timberwolves. I knew what you meant.
Yeah,
I knew what you meant.
I had to. It's been a long weekend, John. So yes, the Thunder got smacked around by the Timberwolves, and then they turned around and took care of business. I do wonder if the Pacers won in one of those miraculous finishes where they come back from 9 down, or they hit a crazy shot, or they get a couple turnovers late in the game. What does that do to the psyche of Oklahoma City in that situation? Because it's not exactly like Oklahoma City's an older, experienced team where they go, we've been here before. We're going to brush it off. Like I think that it's a Spider-Man meme, for lack of a better term. Like these two teams are pointing in the mirror of each other. And so I think if they're able to do something like they did against New York or Cleveland or Milwaukee, maybe they're able to steal that next game. So if it happens in game 1 or game 2, maybe they win game 3 and take a 2-0 lead or a 2-1 lead. And man, that would just be huge. If the Pacers get a lead in this series, I am going to talk myself into this program for about 30 minutes if we start talking about how they can get a lead. And man, last question.
I'm fired up. How did you? You can, if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to. But how did you celebrate after their game 6 win the other night?
So that's a good question. I'm going to give you 2 stories here. They're quick. Let's see, they played Saturday. So game 5 was Thursday night. So I don't remember what we were doing. Abby was out playing volleyball, and I had to do something earlier in the day where I left the house, but I don't remember exactly what it was. I think I was just at the gym. Either way, apparently, when I was out, she had bought some cheesecake to celebrate and hid it in the freezer, so I couldn't find it.
Okay.
So after game 5, she got home and she knew she was keeping up with the game. And she said, well, I'd gotten this in case they won, but do you want it anyway? And I'm a sucker for cheesecake. So I'm like, yeah, we'll drown our sorrows in cheesecake. So we were going to celebrate with a cheesecake on Thursday, but that was our, what do you want to call it?
That was like your sulking.
That was our comfort food.
Comfort food.
Comfort food on Thursday. So then Saturday, after they won, and this is what I had planned to have anyway when they won the series if they got to the finals, I have some of my favorite rye whiskey is from a place in Kennesaw, where I used to live, and I can't get it anywhere else. Now, thankfully, my brother, dad, and I are going on a boys trip in July, and I'll be able to go down and buy a couple bottles of it and bring it back so I can enjoy it. But I have just a little bit left. So I had enough for a pour for me and a pour for Abby. So we had just a tiny bit, not even a shot's worth of that really good, of my favorite whiskey to celebrate. And if they are able to win the finals, or maybe even if they lose, we're going to polish off the bottle because I'll be able to get more of it in the next month or two. So that's how we celebrated. Of course, before that, I was running around the house, jumping up and down, trying not to cry. Like,
how was Biscuit? Was he thrown for a loop with all your celebratory affairs?
No, he was not, because the last 2 days, it's been so nice. I don't know what the weather's been like where you are, but it's been like mid 70s, low 80s.
Yeah, same here.
And then at night, it's been in the 60s. So we've had a fire.
That's the way to do it.
We've taken the TV outside. So Biscuit was outside for like a good portion of the day the last 2 days. So he was just lounging in his dog bed, like catching up on some Z's. He was fine.
There he is. He knows we're talking about him.
He does. He heard.
In the background. Well, we're definitely, if the Pacers, we'll have to see. I know the series kind of gets elongated for the finals. Like, the games it's not every other day like it is throughout the other portions of the playoffs. But if we get to a game 7, or if the Pacers win this thing, you and I are definitely checking in again, because it's history in the making, right? Even though this is something that I've not followed for my entire life, just kind of watch it in the background. You're somebody who is, this is big time for you. So it's been fun to kind of live vicariously through your excitement on social media. And again, I'm rooting for them to win. So I'm hoping they continue to do good things here as they get ready for the NBA Finals.
Yeah, let me chime in. And so people that don't know, I like to tell this story just because I think sports are important and sports matter. So the diehard from me comes from when I was a kid. I had really bad asthma. Not really life-threatening. I guess it could have been life-threatening. So I had to go to Riley's Children's Hospital a lot growing up. And my dad purchased like a mini season package, and he would line it up with my appointments at Riley Children's Hospital. So when we'd go to Riley Children's Hospital, I knew what we were doing. We were going through everything I needed to do to check on my asthma, which was going to about 4 or 5 different wings to do different tests and see different doctors and all that kind of stuff. Then we'd go to Steak and Shake, and then we'd go to a Pacers game. And so that was kind of the genesis. That's the way I've always been a diehard Pacers fan. And adding on to that, then, I've been able to take my grandmother to a few Pacers games. I was able to take Abby. We met, as people know, Mitchell Page and his wife went with us to the Eastern Conference semifinals against the Knicks last year. One of my closest friend went with me last year to the watch party, or 2 years ago to the watch party for the in-season tournament. I had a friend when the Pacers were playing the Heat in those Eastern Conference finals matchups. He would go with me to the games. I took my dad to some games. So it's always just been kind of like a family and friend, really close. I just have such great memories of being downtown Indianapolis, going to games with family and friends. And I just really enjoy the fact that I get to share all those things with my family and friends. And that's why the Pacers mean a little bit more to me than maybe some of the other teams that I root for.
Then that is great to hear, because, and I like that you mentioned sports matter, because, and for some people, I'm sure it is just a casual thing no matter what. But when you have those family connections, those important pieces of your life, like my grandfather on my mother's side is the reason I'm a big IU fan. Like, then when the rest of my family grew up being Louisville fans. And so there's always that personal connection on what drives you to being a fan of a specific team for certain things. And so it's definitely special to hear that side of why you're a Pacers fan. But Dustin, I want to thank you for your time. I know you got to go mow that lawn here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon, but I'm glad that you took some time to gush about your Indiana Pacers here for me today.
Yeah, I always appreciate the opportunity to not be a journalist and be a fan for a little bit. So I appreciate that. And I also need to give a shout out if Jennifer J. Gritty is listening. Shout out to her, because she got me a shirt from one of the games she went to, and I was not able to attend. And I thank you so much for that, because I'm going to add it to my collection. And I've got about, 15 different playoff shirts. And it's just, my mom's going to eventually make those into a blanket. So thank you to her for thinking of me and grabbing that T-shirt when she was at the game.
Well, good stuff. Again, we'll check in if hopefully things go well for the Pacers over the next couple of weeks, but we'll definitely check in if things are going well. But again, enjoy your day, and we'll hopefully do this again very soon.
Sounds good.
And like I've said many times already, hopefully we'll get to continue to see the Pacers have success as they prepare for their NBA Finals series with the Oklahoma City Thunder. But with that being said, that's going to do it for today's show. I mean, 3 guests, that fills up a lot of time, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this style of show. I'm sure it won't be very often. Maybe it will. Who knows? I'm sure it won't be very often, though, that we have 3 guests in one episode. But if you liked it, I'm glad you did. If not, we'll have plenty more episodes where there's not as many guests, and we'll definitely get back into YouTube comments here over the next couple of episodes. But whenever I get the opportunity to save things for future episodes, I like to do that. So appreciate you guys as always. And we'll be back again next week we'll be following along with the Pacers throughout their NBA Finals. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of other things that come about, especially as talks continue about the college football playoff and the NCAA tournament and what expansion may look like as things get more concrete. And of course, we'll be here to track all of it as we get ready for a new collegiate athletic season that will be beginning here in just a couple of short months. So until next week, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by thehoosier.com.